Living my bucolic life, throughout the city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello everybody, welcome back. So I am going to be continuing with my dark academia outfit theme, and this week I'm going to be doing the bottoms. Last time I did the top, I'm going to do the bottoms now. And I originally thought I was going to be using this pattern and put like a bib on it, but when I did my reveal photos for the blouse, I wore my riding skirt. And some people said they wanted to see that, so I'm actually going to do this. And the look of the riding skirt is like this with the 2 rows of buttons coming down. And that is honestly somewhat similar to this look that I was going to do. So instead of a skirt, it's going to be gauchos, whatever you want to call them. It is what it is. But it has a little flap that you button it over the front. It looks like a skirt in the front. You open it up and it looks like pants. And then the back has pleats and everything. And it's actually pretty neat. I've done this twice. Never on this channel, but you know, a while back. So we're going to revisit that. I am going to be using this black cotton fabric, which I think is going to be nice. It's not too thick, it's not too thin. It's the same fabric as that red that I made that retro dress a couple months ago out of, so we will hope for the best for that. So with Folkwear patterns, and yes, this is a current pattern, you can still buy it off of their site or eBay or whatever. It is called the Big Sky riding skirt. I thought I called it Montana, but you know, Montana, Big Sky, it's very similar. So with the Folkwear patterns, main thing is their seam allowances are 1/2 inch instead of 5/8, so be aware of that if you're making any of their patterns. And there's 2 options. There's one that is like a mid-calf, and there's one that is ankle length. And I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, and so I will do that momentarily. But like I said, I've already cut out my pattern because I've made this a couple times. So we'll be able to just get into cutting out the fabric. Okay, so new things in this sewing room here. I don't know if you can tell, but I have light here. I've jimmy rigged up something with an extra light on my tripod here that's over my table. So we're hoping that that's going to work. I wanted to point out that for sizing this, I'm going to go with my waist size because there's a lot of fullness in the hips and everything, so the waist is the most important size here. And so I am going to go with my size 16. This down here is the finished length at back. So they have a culotte and an ankle length. So what I would suggest is you just figure out which length you want and then figure out which version is going to be closer. Just one is longer than the other. And on all of the pieces, this is just one, there is a lengthen and shorten here. And they recommend instead of adding it at the bottom, you know, or shortening it at the bottom, to make the adjustment at this lengthen and shorten hairline. So if you need it 1 inch shorter, fold up a crease that's 1/2 inch thick. If you need it 2 inches longer, splice it and spread it 2 inches at this point. Okay, at this point, I am going to leave it the length that it is. And previously I had cut it at the mid-calf length, which on me, because my legs are shorter than the standard model leg, it doesn't actually come mid-calf. It comes like almost T-length or whatever you want to call it. So my finish length is going to be somewhere between mid-calf and ankle, which is fine. That does not bother me at all. So that is what I am going with as far as length. Actually, I just noticed that previously I cut out everything at the size 18. So I'm going to go with that. You know, it's just 2-inch waist difference, I believe. Yeah, 2-inch waist difference, which basically, you know, if my waistband is going to be slightly too big, it's just going to sit lower. And that's fine. That doesn't bother me at all. So if you see me cutting things out, yes, I am cutting out the size 18. While I was cutting this out, I just wanted to point out, you know, it's a basic of cutting out fabric, but make sure your grain line is parallel with the selvage edge down there. That's really important, especially for pants like this, because they are very long, and if you get it off grain, it's going to hang not quite properly. So what I do is I line up the end of my ruler with the selvage, mark with my thumb where the top of the arrow is, come down here to the bottom. Well, here, that's about as far as you can see. Make sure that that is still lined up with my arrow, and it's not. I need to pull it out. Okay, it's just so that you can make sure that that is correct. So I will double check this piece. There are a lot of pants pieces. The widest one is for the back, and that's because it has big pleats. It's kind of like if a walking skirt and pants had a baby. That's what this pattern is like. So anyway, let me get finished cutting it out. Okay, I got it all cut out, and so we have a lot of pieces. For the waistband, there is a separate front piece, and then another waistband that is everything except the front, okay? So I've got those pieces, and then we have 2 different plackets for the pockets, okay? So there's a G and an H. You do need both of those. 4 pocket pieces. And then for the main part, there is a smaller side back, a side front, a front leg. And the front leg is basically that whole little inseamy kind of area there. A front panel that is cut on a fold. And then the back, which, as you can see, is the most wide out of all of them. But it does have a big pleat in it, so that's what you get. The construction for these is very different than you would normally do for pants, at least in my opinion. So we're just going to take it one step at a time, and it does make sense once you do it in order. If you try to skip around, it's going to cause issues. So welcome back to another day here, and the first piece we're going to use is piece C, the front leg, okay? And there are a couple points that I'm going to need to transfer over, but I'm going to do that in a bit because I'm going to need to serge all the way around this piece first because this stuff will fray, okay? And after I serge it, I'm going to give it a quick press. Then I'm going to come back and mark it, so, you know, a dot or a notch and everything. But this dot I'm going to be needing only for the left side, but honestly I have a hard time remembering at this stage which is right and which is left, so I'm probably just going to mark it on both of them. Okay, and other than that, just getting it serged, and I will do that for every single piece unless otherwise noted for this project, just because this fabric, you can see it's going to want to come apart if I don't. Okay, and I just barely skim the edge with my serger so that I'm not cutting fabric off, I'm just overcasting the edge. While I am changing the thread on my serger, I wanted to point out, someone asked me my opinion on getting a serger and what brand and all that, and I can tell you I am not too picky as long as it works. I've had several different Singer ones, not several, I've had 3 in my lifetime, and they've all worked great. The only reason I switched over to this one several years ago is 1, I found a gonga deal in Goodwill for it, and 2, it's heavier. You know, it's like a tank, and whereas the Singer ones tended to move around on my table a little bit more, this one did not because it was so heavy. But that's it, and I only use the 2 threads plus the needle. I don't use 3 threads. It's just me. You know, everyone has an opinion, and so, you know, that's just my opinion, but you do you. But I don't mind the older, simpler machines. I don't need it to have the whole air threading system. You know, threading the loopers is the hardest part, and you saw it's not that difficult. I just tie the new thread onto the old, pull it out of the tension wheels and pull it through. So that's fine, and then I just need to thread the needle. And to thread the needle, I pull my blade up, and you can pull the blade up in any serger, and then put this down, and of course I'll have the light on, but it does weird things to my camera, as you can see. And then just thread it. And I use a threader. Let me grab it over here. Okay, and for the serger, I use a threader that looks like this, okay? And you just push it straight through like that. And it's easy from the front, because those can be bad angles sometimes. So that's what I do. You know, you can pick if you really love the really, you know, huge ones, or the really modern ones, or the ones with, you know, extra bells and whistles. Great, good for you. Enjoy your machine. For me, this 1980s version Burnett, it is just fine. It does everything I need, and hopefully she will last me for another few decades. While I'm over here, I was going to point out my sewing machine of the day. This is one that I just got going again. I had found her in a garage sale years ago, and it took me this long to get her up and going. It's a Singer 319W, and they're fun because they have, like, instead of always using, you know, the different decorative cogs, you've got these piano or typewriter keys up here on top that you can lift up. So, you know, zigzag, stretch stitch, fun things, you know. I can do those up here, and then cogs here. But they use a special size needle. They have, you know, temperamental issues with bobbins and things. So, you know, not the easiest to get going, but once they're going, I've heard fabulous things about them. So since I just got her, you know, loosened up and going again, I'm going to go ahead and try her out and use her on today's project. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mark these pieces now, and since I've used this pattern before, I already have my little square punched out, but if you've never seen it, I use a thick piece of leather coaster underneath my tissue, a leather hole punch, and just punch it out of the paper so then I can just go straight through it. Because my fabric is so dark, I am using my white heat erasable pen. And if you have these and you're frustrated with your white because you feel like it's not working, give it time. Because basically you draw it, it looks like nothing is there, but as the ink dries, it turns white, and then you can see it, okay? As with everything, test your fabric before you mark everything on the right side, just to make sure, you know, there's not going to be any big issues. But I'm just marking my notches, just because when I cut this out the first time, I actually used my notcher, and I haven't used my notcher in forever. Oh my gosh. It's one of these little tools that you cut out the notches in the patterns. It leaves a little chunk out, so that then it's easier just to come back and draw those in. Maybe I should start using that again. But that's how I'm going to do it. So let me get both sides of this marked. So I have this side marked. I do have them stacked on top of each other, so then I could just flip them over, mark this side, and I know I have two opposite pieces. Now, even though I'm done marking those things, there still is all of these button hole placement lines on here that I'm not doing right now because I just don't want to right now. But I'm going to keep this piece handy so that when that time comes, I can grab it and just reference it then. So now that I have them still stacked on top of each other, remember the seam allowances for this whole project is 1/2 inch, not 5/8, 1/2 inch. So I'm going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance going up here, this whole little front center seam. Okay, let me do that, get it pressed open, and I'll meet you back here. So I have to tell you, I just pressed this open after I sewed it. I didn't look at my instructions, and I should have, because they're going to want you to flat fell this seam, which is good. We haven't done that in a while. So what I'm going to do is I have 2 seam allowances that are 1/2 inch. Okay, I'm going to choose one, probably this one here, and I'm going to trim this seam allowance to 1/4 inch. Okay, so one seam allowance is staying long. This one's going to be half the width. So with my hand, I'm pushing the bottom seam allowance under so it's out of the way, and then just coming back through here and trimming that off. Okay, I'm going to do that all the way up. Okay, so at this point, this is what it looks like. Short seam allowance over here, long one over here. So they're both going to get pushed the same direction with the longer seam allowance on top. I'm going to go ahead and press that first. Okay, so now that it is pressed over, this top layer that is longer, it's going to get folded with its edge underneath and fold down so that we're going to have a little finished seam inside here. And I want to be careful and make sure that I'm not, disturbing how the right side should look. So I'm just going to start in the middle and then work my way out to both sides. Tucking that in and pushing it over, and sticking a pin here to hold it together. Okay, and once you have the first one, it's a little bit easier to move off to the sides, up and down. Once I have this pinned like that all the way, get that thread out of here, I'm going to go back to my machine and edge stitch it along this folded line right here. Okay, before you edge stitch it, flip it over and look at the right side and make sure that you don't have anything messed up, because that could happen. Okay, so I've got that done. So my inside, you can see, looks like that. This is my outside, so I do have this row of stitching showing, which is fine. It's pretty much going to be under that front flap anyway, so that's not a big deal. And it adds a lot of strength to this, crotch type seam, so I'm happy with that. I need to set this aside for a minute and get my piece A front panel piece out. Okay, so this is it. It is piece A, and it is cut on a fold, so there we go. I am going to open this up, and before I mark anything, serge all the way around this piece and then give it a quick press, and I'll be right back. Okay, so this is my front that I did before, and I'm putting it so I have my right side up. Okay, my wrong side is face down right now, and I need to get my front piece here that I have just serged around and pressed. Okay, so it's nicely finished. And I'm going to match it up over here, looking at it this way with the right side up. It's on this side. In the instructions, they have a picture, but the picture is with it upside down. Okay, so they have you looking at it this way, so maybe I'll just flip it this way so it matches. And we're not worrying about this side. This side doesn't matter. It is this side over here that matters. And so I'm going to be matching it up over here. If you lay your diagram down, you'll see we're going to line up this whole side over here and this up here, okay, just to that center seam. So it's kind of why I had it pinned the other way, but we'll just get it started this way. So matching up with the diagram, looking at it this way. There is a dot on this piece. I didn't transfer it over. It's the same one as this, so that's going to match up over here. Okay, and of course, there were notches that I did not transfer over either. All right, I want to make sure that it's even down here at the bottom, and it is, so that's all good. Now I need to sew it up to this center seam line right here. Okay, so I've got it pinned. Now I'm going to flip it to this side so you can see. I'm going to open this up because I want to mark where this center seam is, the original one, not the flat-felled one, okay? And it is right here. I'm going to stick a pin right where that seam is because that's going to be important. I want to make sure that I stop my stitching immediately before that pin. Okay, so I'm going to put a big white line there. You need to, this is still at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Come up here, pivot at a 1/2 inch, come over here and stop right there. You know, back stitch to reinforce it because that's going to come back and bite you later if you don't. This should match up over here, okay? You're not sewing up here, but just to make sure that everything is right. So, there you go. Let me go ahead and put this seam in and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got that on. It's all sewed up here and over. Now we're going to need to flip this. So I'm going to come over here to this corner, trim out some bulk. If you are using a thick fabric, I would recommend, you know, pinking this whole seam line. But this is not that heavy, so I'm not going to worry about it. Now up here at the top, okay, at the very top where I stopped my stitching, where did I stop my stitching? Right there, if you can see, okay. I need to clip up to, get little scissors here, but not through that seam line right there, okay. This is my front panel piece. I just clipped that seam allowance. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and flip the whole thing right side out and then go over to my ironing board and press this nice and flat. They do not say to understitch it, so I'm not going to, but I am going to tell you it probably wouldn't be a bad idea if you wanted to, but you know, why go there? We're sticking to the instructions. I'm going to get my little handy dandy chopstick to poke out this corner because this is a very loosely woven fabric and this is a very rounded edge, so I don't need to worry about it poking through. So what I'm going to do though at my ironing board is, before I press it closed, I'm actually going to press most of this open all the way, and then once it's pressed open it'll be a lot easier to fold it in half and press it in half and make sure that that seam line is on the very edge. So over here, just laying this down. These pants are going to get extremely confusing. I'm just warning you ahead of time, okay? So here is my seam I just made. If I come back and just lightly, you know, making sure I have it truly pressed open, I'm going to go as far up as my little iron tip can go and press it open like that. And look at that. That's from the fold of my fabric. It is what it is. You know, we're going to ignore it. Now that that's pressed open, when I come back this way, it's a lot easier just to find that edge and then press it again. And it's going to be a lot neater that way. So let me go ahead and press all the way up here and straight across to this point. I needed to cut through the seam allowance on both sides here, so now I have it clipped both ways. So when I press this part here that's been flipped, then my remaining panel and pants front is going to kick up here with the seam allowance still intact up there, okay? So that's what it should look like. This part folded in, and then right here where we clipped it, they can stick up. Okay, let me just bring that up here so you can see. So this is the right side with the panel, because there's no seam here. This is the underneath, okay? And you know what? I did that backwards. It's not going to make much difference, you know, because it's just a flat felled seam. But where I told you earlier to put your fabric right side up against here, that was wrong. You should, when you are at this step, put your fabric so that the right side of your pants part is up against the right side here because I did it backwards, so now my inside of my pants is going to be exposed. But it's a flat felled seam, so it's extremely similar on both sides, thankfully. So I'm not going to worry about that, but you know, if you can avoid that, please do. So make sure, and I'm going to make a note of it on the video, that you don't do that. Okay, so with this done for now, I'm going to set it aside and go get my biggest piece, my big back pieces. Okay, welcome back. It's been a couple days. I had a sinus headache yesterday, so I did not feel like sewing, but doing better today. So I've got my big back piece here, and there are pleats and things I need to mark on there, but I'm going to serge around this piece first. You know, just like always. So let me get it serged, then I'm going to iron it so it's going to be nice and flat and everything, and then I'll come back and we can mark up everything we need to. Okay, I've got them serged and ironed, and now I am going to lay my two pieces right side together first. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that I get this whole crunch seam pinned together so that it matches really carefully, and I'm going to do that first. Okay, so now that this is all pinned, I'm matching up my top. There's a little point up here where a dart kind of thing is going to be, and I need to get my pattern piece. Okay, so on the pattern, and I actually should flip this over because this is the right side of the pattern, and I will do that. But if you can see over here, this is the crotch line over there. Way over here, there is a thing that says pleat stitching line, all right? We're gonna need to sew that while these two are still flat together. So let me flip this over this way so it might make a little bit more sense on the camera. I need to make sure that this is matched up well at the top, and over here on this side, I'm going to put my pattern piece on top of it and mark down here where the bottom of that stitching line is, and then up here at the top, I'm going to put a little line. Again, as this dries, it will get brighter. And then, just to help me out, I am going to get that tape off my ruler, draw a line to connect it so I have something to look at while I'm stitching. Okay, so that line is going to be my stitching line. So let me pin it, and I'm just going to pin it straight over this stitching line because I want it to hold in place. And I'll just remove those pins as I go. Okay, so over at my sewing machine, I'm going to sew this seam here at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then this from this dot all the way up to the top. Okay, let me get that done and I'll be right back. Okay, so at this point then, if I open it up, it looks like this up to this point here. Okay, now over here in the crotch area, just like on the front, we're going to do a flat felled seam here. Hang on. I think I'm allergic to something that's blowing around out there at the change in seasons, so every now and then I have to cut the camera just so I can sneeze, so that's what that is. So just like the front, I'm going to need to trim one of these seam allowances. So I'm going to trim, just, you know, picking this one here, trim it down about 1/4 inch. So I've got about half of that seam allowance taken off. Okay, so it's like that. And then, just like for the front, it's going to be a little bit trickier up here because you're working kind of in a cylinder at that very top part, but you know, I trust that you can figure it out. I'm going to do the thing where we fold the longer seam allowance over, lay it down flat like this, and then put a line of stitching right there where that fold is, okay? So you may have to do 1 row of stitching just to this point, dealing with that little cylinder, stop, you know, move everything, and then stitch the rest of the way. At least that's what I'm going to have to do. So let me get all of that done, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got my flat felled seam in, so if you can see, that is the wrong side. I know it's hard to see. Okay, and then on the right side, which is, if you look inside of the little tube, you're going to see that extra row of stitching, which is fine. So when it's all is said and done, and we're not doing this yet, but just to show you, if you match up this seam that we put in out here with that center back seam and lay it like that, and then open this up like this, let me flap that down, it's going to give you this nice little pleat in the back like that, and that's what's going to cover up the tuchus area, okay? But we're not going to deal with that right now. I need to go ahead and get my side back pieces, which are going to get sewn right here. Okay, so the side back piece, letter E, and there are 2 of them cut out. So just like before, I'm going to go ahead, serge around both pieces and give them a quick press, and then I'll come back and we can mark them. Actually, before I walk away, what I want to do is mark which side is which, because this piece looks pretty symmetrical, you know. So the side that has 3 notches is the side that's going to get sewn onto the back piece. The side that only has 1 notch is the side seam. And so I'm going to go ahead and put a letter S, and it will show up eventually, okay, over here on this side, flip it over and put it on this side. And that way, when I'm matching things up, I can make sure that I have 2 pieces and that they are laid in the appropriate way. Okay, so I have 2 opposite ones. So now that those are marked with the letter S for side, I'm going to go ahead and get these serged. Okay, I got them serged. I haven't ironed them yet, as you can see, little wrinkles there. But I didn't want to risk ironing off my little letter S's, so I'm going to go ahead and mark for my dart. And I'm just placing these so they are both face up, and I have my S's on the opposite sides, so I know I'll have 2 opposite pieces. So I'm going to lay this over here. See, that's wrong. I need this part of the pattern to be over here, okay? So there we go. Let me go ahead and mark for the dart. For the side that I am cutting out, I'm marking the little top legs and the dot here. And then I'm going to come back and connect the dots with my marking pen. And I need to do that for this side also while I have them laying here side by side. And then I'm going to go ahead and pin those closed. Okay, so now that they are both drawn on and I'm safe that I have 2 opposite pieces, I'm going to go ahead and get them pinned. So I'm going to stick my pen down about 1/4 inch in from that cut edge and bring it back up about 1/4 inch from that cut edge. Push that all the way through. Come up here where my point is and pinch that. Hang on a sec. I had a stray thread caught in my pen here. Okay. So push those together, pinch it up here at the top, okay? Fold it so I can make sure I have a really nice crease up here. And I'm going to stick a pin through where the very top point of my dart is. And probably one about midway, but I'm going to stick my pin straight through, make sure it comes out in that line on the other side before I anchor it in. And there you go. So I'm going to do the other one too. When I go to sew it, I start on this outside part, and I'm just going to come all the way through, and I'm just going to run off the edge and hand tie my dart threads here. And I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, so I have that dart line sewn in. I know it's hard to see, But just wanted to show you to tie off my threads down here. I'm just going to tie it in a loop. Okay, when I have that loop, I'm going to stick a pin through it and then stick the tip of my pin through that bottom of my dart and pull it. And that's going to cinch that knot all the way down where I need it. And then I can just clip it off. And I usually leave about 1/4 3/8 of an inch tail hanging off, and I think that that is fine. I am going to need to press this little dart towards the side seam, okay? So on my garment here, if you can't see that, I'm going to be pressing it over this way towards my letter S. That's going to erase my letter S, but that's okay because I will know that that is the side seam because that's the way the dart is being pressed. So I'm going to go ahead and do that to both of these. Okay, so this is my center back again that we did earlier, okay? And I have it laid right side up, so I'm looking at this place where the center dart is here. Okay, these are my little flappy parts here. I am going to get one of my side back pieces. I need to put it right side down, and remember the dart is going towards the side seam, so the opposite side is the one that gets sewn onto this piece. So this is coming over here, excuse me, allergies, and I need to match it up here. There is that triple notch about halfway down, and I need to match it from here to here, and then this will get sewn at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, I've got that done. They did not say to flat fill this seam. I guess you could if you wanted to, but I just went ahead and pressed it open and flat, okay? So I did that on both sides. So now this is my back piece, all right? These are the 2 seams I just put in. What I need to do now is open up this big old wide back pleat here, okay? Find my center seam, which, you know, you got 2 rows of stitching, but make sure you find the center seam, match that up to that seam line for that pleat, and I'm going to pin that in place up here before I lose it. Now, these pleats I'm going to go ahead and pin so that they match all the way across. They're going to straddle all the way past that seam line we just put in. That's okay. That's what they're supposed to do, okay? So I'm going to pin this over here like this and over here, you know, making sure my cut edges are even and that this seam allowance is still pressed open up here. And I'm going to run a row of stitching across the top here at about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. They say to baste it, but I'm just going to use my machine on a long stitch at about a 1/4 inch in, all the way across here just to hold this part up here nice and flat. Okay, so this is what my back looks like from the right side right now. All right, so here's my pleat down here, and that is totally separate from the back of the pant. And then we have these darts, and then this is the sides over here, okay? I need to go ahead and get my pocket pieces out. There are 4 of them, and I'm going to go ahead and serge around them and press them really quick before I bring them back over. Okay, so these are my pocket pieces. So I need to mark where this dot is. I'm going to go ahead and mark that on all of my pieces, but I want to make sure I have opposite, so 2 sets. So I'm going to mark that one this way and this one over here like that, and then, you know, do the next thing. Now, if you can see, my pocket is actually slightly bigger down here than my pattern piece. That's okay. You know, when I iron it, it grew a little bit. That's not going to bother me one bit. And it shouldn't you either, or anyone else that's going to see you wearing your garment, because it's going to be inside and completely hidden. Now I want to show you, this is the pattern piece for my side seam, okay? And there's a little star marked here. That star is going to match up with this point. So what I wanted to show you is if I line up that point, the notch is going to line up, but more importantly, the very top cut edge is going to line up, okay? So because of that, it's going to be pretty easy to place these on my fabric. So I'm just going to need 2 of them right now because, you know, we're only sewing onto the back. We'll have 2 more when we sew the front side, which is a little tricky. So this is the right side of my back here. Okay, I'm going to pick a pocket piece that when I lay it down on here, I can see where my little dot is. So I'm going to line it up so that this top corner matches and come all the way down here. Okay, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and pin it to both sides of my front or my back. You know what I mean. Now, normally I sew this seam smaller than all my other seam allowances, but not for this garment. So to sew this, I'm going to go from this top edge just to that dot at the 1/2 inch seam allowance, okay? So this bottom part of the seam allowance is still not going to be attached down here. And I need to do that for both sides. Okay, so I've got that sewn on, all right? Now where the stitching ends right here, okay, where that star is, this is my back piece, this is my pocket. Just ignore the dogs down there. I need to clip this fabric just to the seam allowance of the skirt up to, but not through, that stitching line. Okay, so it's open like that. And that way, when I am pressing it, they want me to press both of these seam allowances towards the pocket, okay? And this little bit down here, well, it's just going to stay where it is. All right, so let me get that clipped on the other side and both of these pressed like this. Okay, so I have my side front piece here, and just like the side back, there's a little star point, and I am going to go ahead and mark that on both sides along with, in case this gets erased, my letter S. For side, okay, that will show up more as it dries. I'm going to do that on both sides and then go over and serge around both of these pieces. Okay, so I've got them both serged, so I have them laying here, so I have opposites. So this is my side, front, okay? So now I am going to get a pocket. We're going to call this the right side. You know, it's on my fabric, it's the same either way, so just choosing. And I'm going to match up my pockets on here just like I did on the back. So my cut edge, my cut corners up here are going to line up. This dot down here, I need to get that to line up-ish, okay? And when I sew these, it will be at the 1/2 inch seam allowance from this point here all the way up to the top. And I'm going to go ahead and do that to both of my side front pieces. Alrighty, so I've got my pockets sewn onto my front pieces. Just like the back, we're pressing this seam allowance towards the pocket, okay? Away from the skirt, towards the pocket. And just like the back, I'm clipping in this seam allowance to the point where the dot or star or whatever it was is, okay? I'm not worrying so much about the pocket piece right at this moment, just the skirt piece. Okay, so when I lay this flat, this part here is a little bit separate. Okay, I need to do that to this one, and then we're going to go ahead and sew them to the back piece. I'm looking ahead at the instructions, and there is not a pocket placket, just the opening plackets. I don't know why I was thinking that. So, you know, if I wanted to, I could have sewn these at a smaller seam allowance and everything, but at this point I think it would be more confusing than anything. So even though there's not a placket on here, still sewing it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance I think is the way to go. Okay, so this is my big back piece down here, and I'm going to take one of my front pieces where I can put it right sides together. That is the wrong one. Okay, this one I'm putting right sides together, and I need to pin and match up all the way around my pocket pieces, okay, and then down this front part, or this side seam here. So let me get that pinned first. So you want to make sure up here at the top that you're very careful to match up this very top seam up here. Here's my pocket edge where that meets. Okay, make sure that that matches up, because if not, it will definitely show from the outside. Now, when we're sewing it, I want to show you, because I'm going to do this in 2 separate steps. I'm going to sew the pocket on both sides, and then I'm going to sew the side seam, okay? Now, on my pocket, let me stick a pin right here. Remember, this part is clipped so that it can move out for right now. I'm going to start up here at this seam line here, and I'm stitching over the seam allowances, so they are both still going towards the pocket edge. And this is at, well, actually up here at the top, it might be slightly smaller than a 1/2 inch. Doesn't really matter though, we'll call it a 1/2 inch. Okay, and once I get past those seam allowances, just like a 1/4 inch past it is where I'm going to need to leave my needle down and pivot and come down all the way around here, you know, at about the 1/2 inch point here. Leave my needle down and pivot and come up. And I want to pull all this stuff out of the way. Leave my pocket pieces open. Okay, so these are open flat, and I'm going to aim at that dot. So my stitching line is going to be like this. Okay, and then I'm going to stop right here at that dot, and I'm going to have these seam allowances pulled this way, out of the way. Okay, I'm not stitching my seam allowances, I'm just stopping right here before I get to them. All right, so even though they were pressed this way before, I'm pulling them back and just holding them out of the way. All right, so once again, it's going to be coming over the seam allowances here at the top, all the way around, and then coming back up to that dot. And I'm going to do that on both pockets. Okay, so this is my side seam I have put in there. So when everything is done, this shorter part is the front here, okay? So this pocket needs to be pressed so that the seam allowances are going towards the front, okay? So this pocket's going to be laying like this. Come on, lay nicely for me here, okay? And then below the pocket, because it's clipped, we can open up this seam allowance and press it open, okay? So below the pocket, press it open, at the pocket, all the way up to the top, making sure that, you know, these seams here at the top of the pocket are matching up nicely. Press it so that all of this is going towards the front. So let me go do that, and then what we're going to do is after it's pressed, come back and up here at the top, put I'm going to do it at about, you know, a fat 1/4 inch in, a row of stitching across here that's going to lock down this little pocket flap and these seam allowances so they're going the right way. And I'll do that on both sides. Okay, so I'm over here and I pressed it, and I want you to see how you can see that big fat seam allowance bump down. I don't like that, so actually before I stitch this closed, I'm going to come back in here, and with my pinking shears, I am going to cut out about half of this seam allowance on this side here. Okay. And up here, it's latched into that stitching. Let me erase those marks there. Okay, so if I put this back over now and lay everything nicely so I don't have creases and repress it, hopefully this bump is gonna be a lot less conspicuous. Okay, so I don't know if you can see, there's kind of a line there, that's from before. It will go away eventually, but this is flat now. It's because that zigzagging in the pinking, it kind of distributes where that edge going down is, and it makes it very vague. So I can't even feel that edge now when I press on it, and I think that's a lot better. So just letting you know, that's what I'm going to do. It wasn't really in the description, but it's going to help. So there's two sides. This is the other pocket here. There is the side that is not up against the front and the side that is. I'm not worrying about this side. I am only worrying about this one, the one that is up against this front piece when the pocket's in its right position. But if you wanted to do the other one, it wouldn't hurt anything. Just because some people ask, yes, the cat is still hanging out. Midna, get your head out here so people can see your face. There she is. So she's still keeping me company. All right, so I completely forgot that we're supposed to put gathering stitches in here, but because they want you to put gathering stitches in, and then before you pull the gathering stitches, to baste this down. I've basted it down now. I am just going to put my gathering stitches over it. I don't think it's going to matter that much. It's just for easing in a small amount. But they want you to put them between the seam allowances. So I'm just putting my ruler here, and this is the inside of my piece, obviously. Drawing a line at that 1/2 inch mark because, you know, 1/2 inch seam allowances. So I'm going to put my 2 little rows of gathering stitches up here, and I'm probably going to go ahead and run it over where my pocket piece is, which is like at that point, if you can see. I'm going to go ahead and go over that to where these seam allowances are, but when I actually pull the threads together, it's going to be bunching up in this area. And it's not a whole lot, it's just a little bit of ease. Let's see if you can kind of see in this diagram how they have tiny little lines up there. That's indicating the ease that's going to be put in. So not a whole lot, just enough to give it a nice curve over, you know, round hips. Okay, so I've got 2 rows of gathering stitches there. Hopefully you can see. But I need to set this aside for a minute and grab my placket pieces. There's 2 of them. There's piece H and piece G. Okay, so these are both just triangle pieces, but what we're going to be doing the same thing for both of them. So let me see if I can try to raise you up a bit. What I need to do is I'm not going to be serging these. They're going to be, you know, kind of hidden in. It's kind of like a facing. But what I'm going to need to do is on one side and the bottom of opposites. So say for piece G here, it'll be like in here and at the bottom. Piece H, the same thing, inside and at the bottom. So I have 2 opposites. I need to fold my seam allowances in by a 1/2 inch. And I will do this at the ironing board very carefully and press it. And the same thing at the bottom. I need to press it up 1/2 inch, okay? Once I have them pressed, then I'm going to come back and edge stitch it down that fold all the way down and over at the bottom, so that on the outside it's going to have a very nice edge. Those outside pieces will eventually be whip stitched down, so you're not going to see the little raw edge right here. So, you know, you don't have to worry about serging it or turning it in and everything, because that's going to end up hidden. But let me go ahead and get that done for both of these pieces. Okay, I just got that done, and I just noticed that they wanted you to top stitch it 3/8 of an inch in, and whereas I did it, you know, right at the edge, I'm not too sure that that's going to make any difference because it's going to be on the inside anyway. So I'm going to get my piece G, which is the more narrow of the 2. So I'm putting my wider ones aside here. Grab my piece G, and we're going to get these sewn on. Okay, so I had to go get my front panel. This is the one that we did first, you know, that has this little piece and our front seam like this. I know it's dark, sorry about that. Okay, so looking at it so that I have my 2 piece C's, these ones that have like the crotch kind of seam, those are piece C. And I'm trying to set this up like on there instruction sheet here in case you're following along. So on the back side of this piece C is piece A, okay? And on this far side of piece A is where we're going to be sewing placket G. And I want to get the one that, because I have two opposites here, that when I sew it on, I'm going to have my folded edge here and here. Okay, so it's raw edge on top, raw edge on side. All right, so again, this is my center front seam, my little crotch kind of area here. Flipping it over, looking at the back side of it, which is still the right side, which is piece A, front panel over here. I know it's confusing. I'm going to go ahead and get this pinned on, and we are going to sew this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, straight down from the top to this bottom part right here. I just grabbed my front panel piece pattern, which is what this is because I had erased my mark, but I'm just laying it on top to make sure I'm positioned correctly, because there is going to be a little square, all right, for your size, and where that square is, that's the level that the bottom of your fold should be. And I am good, so I'm not going to stress about it too much. Go ahead and pin this and stitch it on. Okay, the position that the bottom of the pocket is, where our stitching starts, I'm going to make a clip almost up to the point that that stitching starts, right there, okay? It's not all the way, but it's close. Now, above that stitching, they want you to trim off the seam allowance. It looks like in the drawing that they only want you to trim the seam allowance of just this top piece, but I am going to go ahead and pink the entire thing because it's going to lay a lot flatter for me. So up here, I'm pinking off the edge of that whole seam allowance all the way up to the top up here. Got a little wonky right there, but that's okay. Alrighty. So now what I'm going to do is fold this over and press it, and they want you to just turn it to the inside like this and press it in again. I'm actually going to understitch it, so basically get all this stuff out of the way. Once I have all of this seam allowance pressed towards here, I am going to come back, and on the facing side, that's what this thing is, put a row of stitching right here on this side of that seam line, straight down, going through all of these seam allowances underneath, just because I think that's going to give it a better edge for me. So let me do that real quick. Okay, so that is my row of understitching right there. So now this is the wrong side here of my front panel A. I'm going to flip the whole thing towards that inside, get it positioned nicely so that my whole little placket thing is on the inside. And if you can see, my understitching is pulling everything around, giving me a nice edge, so it's going to look great on the outside, okay? And because we pinked out all of that bulk, we don't have that step down in the seam allowance showing. So I need to pin this in place, and they want you to come back and just whip stitch this edge down here. I'll just do that with some very dark, almost black thread, so it shouldn't show up, and I'm probably over pinning here, but it's kind of funky fabric. So there is another one of these, so we need to put this one on the other side. So let me see if I can get these pants here. This is over here like this, okay? Here is your pants underneath. So that's going to be coming this way. This is for buttons. We also are going to need to put buttons here, Okay, it's kind of confusing, but it's this area up here that we're dealing with. So we're going to need buttons on this front little flappy part and the underneath. Okay, so I had to change the battery out of my camera. So before I've sewn this, I'm just laying so that I'm looking at the front panel here, and if I push down, I can feel that center seam underneath. Okay, that's the orientation I have. Okay, so actually, if I lay it this way, it's going to match up with their diagram right here, because this can get confusing. Okay, so this is the diagram that we're trying to match. So the part that I just pinned, it's laying down there, okay, and that's the only thing on this side. Okay, if I pull this point straight up in the air, I have, this is a piece C with the crotch down here. This is the other piece C with the crotch, and this is panel A here. So panel A on this side, panel C on this side. Okay, looking at it that way, this piece C right here, this is the right side, is going to get this piece here, which is the other side, because there's two different ones of this pocket facing G. Okay, and that is going to go here. It's the same as we did on this side, pinning it here, making sure that the bottom is going to match up with the little square on the pattern, which it should, and it should be the same as over here, which it is. Sewing this at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, clipping it, pinking the seam allowance off, and then pressing it over and understitching it, just like this side. So let me do that, and I'll show it to you with the understitching on it so that we can get everything oriented correctly. Okay, so this is the one I just sewed on. Got my understitching on, you know, it's clipped and everything. So now I can turn it wrong side up, and just like I did before, I'm going to fold it in and pin it carefully along here. Remember, we have it clipped down here just below that spot so that that side seam can open up. Or it's not side seam, it's more of a front-ish, side-ish seam. And I'm going to go ahead and get both of these whip stitched down while I am at it so that this is nice and neat. So when I'm trying to sew invisibly, basically, and I hope you can see, I'm just going to try to pick up like one little thread back here, okay? And then come up through my facing, move up, you know, a fat 1/8 of an inch, and do it again. And doing it that way, hang on, stick that needle there, on the outside, you can't really see that, you know, especially once I put a button over it, but that's going to work out well, because these two strips here is what our buttons are going to be, actually our buttonholes are going to be in this. Part of me is wishing that I put interfacing in here because this fabric isn't the greatest, but you know what, I think that it's going to be okay because I've got 2 layers here, so I think we're going to be okay. But you know, this will have buttonholes that are going to be having big buttons going through them, so if you feel like your fabric is too lightweight, probably interfacing this little piece would not be the worst thing. I did not even look to see if they are asking for interfacing. Nope. Nope, they just say cut 2 of fabric, so no interfacing requested, but if you wanted to, it wouldn't hurt. So once I get all the way up, then I'm just going to kind of baste across the top and just to hold that facing together. Make a couple back stitches to secure it, one in the opposite direction. And I'm going to go ahead and pin this onto my dress form just so we can kind of get a look at what this thing is supposed to be doing, because if you're following along, right now it's looking a little bit confusing up here. Okay, so I just have it pinned on here. Now, there's one piece that has a finished edge on the top. That's the flap that just sticks straight out. The two sides that for me are serged, you know, but they haven't been sewn together yet, that's going to be just pinned straight onto my dress form, okay? Because that's going to be enclosed in a waistband. This part is not. So here's the thing. When I want it to look like a skirt, I'm going to have this buttoned over here on this side. When I want it to be like pants, this is going to come over here and button on this side. And, well, it's hard to tell on there, but they'll be pants, okay? So this part here that is sewn on the top, that's the piece that moves back and forth. Okay, let me just pin it over here in the skirt position for right now. And this part up here will be in a waistband. So this is going to have a separate waistband piece here. And then the other big piece that we already did is going to have a waistband piece that's going to go from here all the way around to over here. And then this whole front is going to button onto it. But below this pocket placket area, it's going to be sewed together. I hope that makes sense. This thing, it can't, the first time I did it, I think I redid it like 5 times because I was sure that I was just losing my mind. But it's a cool skirt once we're all done. But that's what we're looking at right now. Okay, so back here at the table with my back piece. Now, if I open it up flat, on either side there's this, here's where the side seam in the pocket is, and then there's this cut side here. And we still have these 2 H pieces, and they're going to go on either side very similar to what we just did on that front piece, but instead they're here on this back piece, okay? So just like for the other ones, I'm matching it up here at the top corner. I'm going to pin it down here and sew this at a 1-inch seam allowance. Move that out of the way on both sides, and then I'll be back here. Okay, so this is the seam I just put in. Okay, we're looking at the wrong side here. And just like before, what I'm going to do is clip the seam allowance of the skirt almost to that point where everything comes together right there at the bottom of this little placket. And I am also going to pink the seam allowance pretty much in half, going down this placket to deal with bulk issues, okay? And of course, what I do on this side, the other side will be the same. So just like before, they don't show you to do it in the instructions, and yes, we do have these gathering threads up here in the way, just ignore them. But I'm actually not understitching this one, and the reason is because this is going to be done slightly differently, but I am going to go ahead and press it. So I'm pressing it so these seam allowances are underneath the placket, and it's going to be pressed flat like that on both sides. Okay, so last time on the front piece, we folded it straight in like this. This time, this folded edge here, I'm going to fold it in and match it up to my seam line. So I'm going to end up with a piece that looks like about 1/2 inch deep from the wrong side and the right side, okay? So these gathering threads are really annoying me here, just saying. So what they ask you to do in the instructions is to machine top stitch it once you have it pinned here. I'm actually going to whip stitch it just because I'm not 100% convinced that if I top stitch it from this side, I'm going to get it perfectly lined up on this side. And since it's such a short distance, it's not going to take me very long just to whip stitch it down. So that's what I'm going to do. Just baste across the top, whip stitch this, and close up this bottom a little bit. But honestly, that's not going to matter too much because that's going to be at the bottom in a seam anyway. So what I do here, of course, I will do on the other side also. So once I get this whip stitch closed, we'll be back and work on the next step. Okay, so now that I have that done, this is my big back piece here, and I'm just going to show you one side. And again, what I do here, I'm going to do the other side also. So I've got my front piece, and I'm going to put my front piece right side down. This is right side up, and I'm going to match up the side. It has its little placket on it. So I can turn my light a bit. And I'm going to match up the side seam. So from way down here at the bottom until just below where these plackets are. And they should be at the same level right here. Okay, I'm going to sew up here at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, just from the bottom up to this point. Okay, so at this point I have it, the side seam sewn. Okay, up to that point, and they're pressed open. All right, I'm going to show this to you from the right side because I think it's going to make more sense now. So this is my sides over here. This is that front panel that's coming in. This is these are the plackets that we did where you see that 1 inch type band on it. What I need to do is flip up this front piece over it, and I am wanting to make sure that, let's see if I can do this so it's going to look nice for the camera here. Like for example, just on this side, I want this front center placket to lay flat on top of this one, okay? And once I can see that it's positioned correctly, that it's not like that and puckered in one side or the other, I'm going to come a few inches up and pin it together so that I know that these two layers are where they need to be, okay? So now if I go ahead and flip it to the wrong side, that pin's going to hold it in place. Now, from the wrong side, this is what it looks like. What I need to do is stitch across the bottom here, and they are going to tell you to do it a 1/2 inch above this bottom point. I'm going to do this by hand, okay? I'm just going to be stitching straight across here, and I'm going into this placket. So I'm attaching this placket to this one, but I'm going to try not to go all the way through so it's visible on the front, but I'm going to be going through all of this stuff, okay? So again, that is at about 1/2 inch above right here, okay? And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Okay, so I've got that done. So when I open my little placket, there's a seam right here that's going to keep this from wanting to, you know, fly open any further. So that is good. And then after this step, we move on to step 4, which is the waistband and inseam. And I am going to do that tomorrow. I'm going to call it a night tonight. I think that's a good place to stop. So I will see you then. just have the weirdest thing where my microphones weren't working and I don't know why, and I just rebooted everything, so hopefully they're not dying on me. Anyhow, you just saw voiceover, I'm assuming, my little crotch inseam area there. And what I'm going to be working on is my waistband now. So we have a short little piece for the front and a longer piece for that back wraparound area. And I'm going to be doing the same thing to both of these for these next couple steps. I need to figure out where this center fold line is, which is, you know, exactly halfway. So what I'm going to do is go over to my ironing board. I'm going to lay them in half and just iron them like that so I have that crease visible to me when I go to my next step. Okay, so with them folded in half, I'll just show on this smaller one here, you can see it is 2 inches from fold to cut edge. I need to cut interfacing that will go in here. And so, like for this piece, you know, same procedure but different measurements for each one here. I'm not going to want to interface my seam allowances. And since I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, that means that I want to cut a piece that is 1.5 inches wide, or deep, I guess is the word here. And then I also want it 1/2 inch narrower on each side. So here it is almost 7 inches. I'm sorry, my ruler is backwards. Okay, it is almost 11 inches, so I'm going to cut it back to just below 10 inches for my interfacing. And I'm going to be using this black medium weight. They call it featherweight. Okay, it feels like a medium weight to me, but it is black, and so that way it'll look the part, you know, in case it wants to come through, because this is kind of a loosely woven fabric. So what I'll be doing then is, like I said, I'm going to set my ruler over here. Don't think you can see. So that I am at 1.5 inches, and over here so that I am at, what did I say? Did I say just under 10 inches or just under 9 inches? I'm sorry about that. Just under 10 inches. Okay. So I'm going to set it here like this, right there. Okay. And then I can just draw a line and cut it out. You know, if you want to use a rotary cutter and all of that stuff, that is great. But this is working for me. So let me go ahead and use the same procedure for cutting out a strip for my back waistband piece. You know, the same thing, 1.5 inches deep, 1 inch long or shorter than the length of my fabric piece, and I will be right back. Okay, so now that I have these cut, I'll show you on this one. Where I can see that center line, that is where the top of my interfacing is going to go. And I'm going to place it here so it's centered, and I have about a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side, okay, and the one on the bottom. And then they have you stitching it on by hand up here at the top. This is fusible, so I'm just going to go ahead and press it on. So hopefully you can see what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to do that for both this one and my longer version down here. Okay, so now that it is fused on, I need to fold this in half, wrong sides together, so that my interfacing is on the outside. And then where I don't have interfacing down here, it's going to be easy to do. I need to fold up this seam allowance, okay? So it's going to look like this. And I need to press it so it's like that. I'll probably put a pin on each end. But I need to do that same thing for this shorter piece and the longer piece. Okay, so now that I have that done, I'm going to come back and stitch across the ends, you know, of both pieces at that 1/2 inch seam allowance. And after that, then I'm going to cut the corner off to remove some bulk and flip it the right way so I can press it nicely. Okay, so it's all flipped forward, and for some reason my seam allowance looks a lot shorter than 1/2 inch here. I thought I measured it correctly, but you know, things happen, so I can make that work. So I'm going to go ahead and put the front waistband piece on. Now this center flappy part here, I just need to keep it out of the way, okay? Because that's not going to be included in that waistband. So I'm just laying this so that my cut edges that are serged, you know, are sticking up. This I'm just kind of pulling down out of the way. Hope you can see that. Now I'm going to put it so that my folded side is up. Place it on here. And if your, you know what, I should do the center point first. Excuse me a second. Find my center point, because that I am going to line up with this seam opening right here. Oh, this thing, it's fraying so badly already. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm sticking a pin here at that center front area. I'm doing it sideways because it's being obstinate. And matching up my sides over here with that little folded side of my waistband. And the same thing over here. Now, I was about to say, if you feel like this has stretched, your skirt part has stretched out a little bit, it won't be so bad that you can't ease it in, which is what I am going to be doing. It's just a little bit, and this fabric is finicky, so that was probably the issue. Okay, so now that I have it all pinned here, when I go to sew this, because it looked like my seam allowance was not quite exactly the 1/2 inch, what I need to do is open this up like this. This is that folded part, so that I can get my presser foot right here and make sure that this is at 1/2 inch. And then I can, you know, carry on all the way across here. And at this side also folding this open so I can make sure that this is at 1/2 inch seam allowance too, okay? So that way it doesn't matter what exactly this is. I can adjust that top crease later, you know, but I want to make sure that at these 2 points it's at the 1/2 inch seam allowance, because that way it's going to match up with the back one, which I will also make sure has a true 1/2 inch seam allowance at this point, if that makes any sense. So let me go ahead and sew this on right here. Okay, I got that on. I had to change out battery in my camera again. I feel like my batteries aren't lasting as long as they used to. Okay, so this is what it looks like up here in the front. This little flap is free, and I have this seam coming straight across. So let me flip it over here. And what I'm going to do is tuck that seam allowance up. And it's assorted stray threads. And I'm going to pull it down so that, sorry about that, I'm pulling it down so that the folded edge is just covering. It's actually covering and beyond by about 1/16 of an inch the seam line that I just put in. Okay. And I'm glad it is covering it, because I am going to enclose this by stitching in the ditch. I'm hoping. Hang on a second. Let me get this pinned here. And one more here. Okay, so hopefully you can see this fold is beyond that stitching line by, well, if that's the stitching line there, probably about 1/16 of an inch. Not a whole lot, just a little bit, okay? So on this side then, if I'm looking at the right side, if I do like a top stitch just right here at the very edge, that is going to grab and close up this back part. And that's what I am going to do. So let me run over to my machine and put it here. I was going to do a stitch in the ditch, but actually I think it'll be easier if I just do an edge stitch. So it's just going to be just barely on the waistband side going straight across. Well, normally this would work, but I think because I had my seam allowance length a little off on my waistband. You see how there's like so much hanging off here? It's secure. It's definitely secure, but on the front, it's not perfect. Does anybody else in the world care about that? Probably not. But it's going to bother me. So I'm going to pull it out and just whip stitch it invisibly in the back, you know. So give me a second. Let me pull this out, whip stitch it up, and I will meet you back here. So normally, just, you know, I'm not trying to make excuses for myself, but normally I have no problem getting super, super precise edge stitching and stitching the ditch and all that, but I'm working on that 319 machine I showed at the very beginning, and I'm still working the bugs out of it, and I only have one presser foot for her that fits her right now, and it's super wide, and so it's hard to see exactly what's going on. And there's a few things I still need to modify. I think I need to change out her belt, and I might even change out her motor because it's super noisy and annoying. So, yeah, I'm not trying to make excuses, but if I was on one of my, you know, very often used, most loved, and, you know, all the attachments for kind of machines, yes, I believe I could edge stitch this perfectly, but not today. And honestly, whip stitching it, it's not that difficult, and, you know, it will look nice on the outside. Just ignore that thread. I need to pull it off, you know. There you go. So yes, this is called a riding skirt, and yes, from the photos you would think it's for horse riding, which, you know, will work. But you can also like ride a bicycle with it. You know, there's nothing saying that. And the other thing is, because it is pants, it is a skirt-looking thing that you can wear in high winds and not worrying about it blowing straight up. You know what I mean? So, you know, many options, even if you're not going to jump on a horse and ride, which I am definitely not going to do. One, because I don't mend as easily as I used to, and also because our horses are in retirement. They are not ridden any longer. So there you go. Alrighty, let me go ahead and get the waistband together to do the back. Now don't forget, we have these gathering stitches here at the front areas that we're going to need to be pulling in to gather. And so I think I'm going to get my back piece here, and the first thing I'm going to do on this waistband is put a mark where that center back is, and I'm just going to draw it here on the folded part. Okay, so I have a good place to start. And so if I'm just kind of trying to lay this flat, this is my center back here. Here's my pleat, all right? So I am going to, again, that's the right side, laying this like so. So I'm looking at my folded piece, and I'm going to pin it. I want to make sure all of this is still as flat as it should be. There are a lot of layers right here because, you know, we have that big box pleat and seam allowances and all kinds of stuff. So, all right, now this should match up and lay flat, and I'm going to go ahead and pin it all the way to this dart on each side on the back here before I move it from this position, so that I know that at this point at least everything is right. Okay, so that is there. Coming over here, this is the dart that I am going to stop my pinning at right now. And here, there's like seam allowances and things. Lots of stuff going on inside here. Okay, so now coming over to this side. And of course, as always, what I do over here, I will also repeat on the other side. I'm going to match up this edge, this folded edge here, with the folded edge of my skirt first. And then let's take a look at exactly how much we still need to pull in these gathering stitches. Nothing, honestly. Look at that. It's going to lay nice and flat. I'm wondering, They didn't really have specific marks on here to match up with the side seam or anything, so I was just, you know, putting it at the same amount all the way across. And yeah, I'm actually going to pull these two out just to, you know, fluff this out and make it work. But I am not going to be needing to pull these gathering stitches, so there's that. But let me go ahead and get it pinned, and then just like the other one, be careful of this pocket, lots of thickness going on there. I'm going to sew it on at a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across. So let me do that and I will meet you back here. Okay, so I got it sewn on. So my first thing is I flip it this way and double check to make sure everything looks right on the right side, and I think it does. So just like my other one, I am going to fold it so it meets up with that stitching line, and then I am just going to whip stitch it down. I think that's going to be fine. So just give me a few minutes. Well, for you it'll be kind of instantaneous. I got to clip all of these gathering threads or just tuck them in that I've had hanging there in my way all this time. Kind of useless, but that's okay. All right, let me get this done, whip stitched in, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, hello, welcome back. It's actually been a couple days, and I had to take a pause because I was looking through all my buttons, and for the view I'm doing, I needed 18 3/4 inch buttons, and I could not find that many matching buttons in that size for what I need. So I put in an order a couple days ago to 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞.com, and because they have nice buttons at a good price and everything. And so I was going to wait until they came to continue, but I'm afraid that I might run out of time. So what I'm going to do is just use a different 3/4 inch button as a guide. Save that little card. And I'm going to go ahead and work on finishing off everything else here so that when I get my buttons, all I have to do is sew them on. So that is going to be my plan. But that's the size button that we're going for. I think the ones I ordered are like this, but just plain black, just a regular suit kind of button. So since I have all of this together at the bottom, I might just go ahead and hem these up first before I work on the buttons and everything. I think that that would give me a nice placement. Okay, so the hem line is 1.5 inches from the cut line, all right? And what they want you to do is press under, just get all my things out of the way, press under the raw edge 1/2 inch first, and then come back and turn it up the 1 inch, okay, and press it that way. So it's going to look like that. So I'm going to go over to my ironing board and get that pressed up. I'm probably going to stitch that by hand just because that's what I've been doing everywhere else, and it gives a nice clean finish without having a row of stitching going across on the outside. So I'll just be whip stitching that in. Okay, so I've got my hem pinned up, and next time I am downstairs watching something, it's my husband's day off work, so we'll probably watch an episode of something we're binge watching down there. I think we're on MasterChef now. But anyway, what I need to do is get some hook and eye sewn on up here, okay? And I am using these, again, they don't sponsor me, but they really should, 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐞.com. And I like these. They have this nice substantial back for it. And then here is the little bar, okay? So the hook part, hang on a sec. Okay, sorry, I had to run outside for a second. All right, so I'm going to use my hooks, and on both sides of this front waistband piece, I'm going to be placing them so that the outer edge of this hook is about 1/8 of an inch in, okay? And I'm going to be pretty much just centering it in this waistband. So let me go ahead and get that stitched on, you know, very solidly on both sides, and then we'll put the bars on. Now when I'm sewing this on, I don't want my stitches to show up on the outside, but if I put it here, I've got all of the seam allowance from this edge here that I sewed that I can, grab into. So even though I'm going through a lot of layers over here, it's still not going to be visible on the outside edge. And then down here at the bottom, even though it's only one layer I'm going through, it is the layer that has the interfacing on it. So that should give it enough oomph that I'm not going to worry. So on the outside, you don't see anything. On the inside, very secure, So I'm going to go ahead and tie this off and put the one over here. Okay, so I got my hooks on. Now I need to position the little bar here, okay? So if I lay this part over and I want to position it so that when this is going to be, say, pulling as hard as it can, I'm just going to use my pin here as the tack. When it's pulling as hard as it can, you still don't see this little seam here, okay? So for me, what I do is I put a pin in my hook, okay? And then, putting some pressure over here, I just kind of move it over until I hit that sweet spot, which for me is right here, okay? So with that, this is the position of my pin, all right? I just pull it straight out and into the fabric at that position. Okay, so now this pin is going to mark where this bar tack needs to be. And if you can see, oops, I pinned it to the back, it is actually, probably a little more than 1/8 of an inch out from where this seam is, okay? So that's where it's going to go. It's probably going to be about the same position on the other side, but I will double check to make sure. And for this one, because it's, going through to the inside, you can go all the way through the fabric, And what I do is I do stitches both on either side of the eyelet and above and below it, So I have the stitches going off in 3 directions at each eyelet, just to give it a little more stability. And yes, I do wax my thread for things like this, Does it actually make it stronger? I don't know. I really don't know, but it makes me feel like it's stronger. And if that helps, well, there you go. So if you are participating in our Dark Academia Sewing Challenge for the month of September 2024, some beeswax from our farm, because we do have many, many beehives, will be included in that little prize pack. Okay, so let me go ahead and get this sewn on. Okay, so now it is time to put buttonholes on. And there's going to be a boatload of buttonholes, so make yourself comfortable, do a couple test runs, make sure your buttonholer is working well. If you haven't been around, this is the buttonholer I use. And I am going to be using, let me see if I can loosen this up, over there. Oh, I'm sorry for that angle. That is my old 201, Singer 201. That is what I use for my buttonholes. And in general, you can buy these, used on Marketplace and stuff. This is a 𝐥𝐤𝐤 brand, but it works on Singer machines. You have to make sure that it fits the shank of your machine. So this is a low shank one. I have slant shank ones. I have high shank ones, After a while, they breed. But they're really good at making wonderful oval curved buttonholes. They also make eyelet buttonholes really well and things like that. So if you haven't tried one and you have a machine that has a low shank, say, and most domestic machines do, something like this could fit on it. You don't need any fancy stitches. So with that, what I'm going to be doing is first marking where all of my buttonholes go. And on this piece here, my front panel piece, it has positions for all of these buttonholes, okay? There's so many. All right, so say on this piece, up here was my cutting line, and here is my front panel piece. We actually start measuring where the buttonhole goes by where the stitching line is, okay? So I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to fold it at that stitching line. because that is actually where it's going to match up with the top of this piece. And it should be this way, but it's going to be easier to show you with it this direction because it's hard to get that to show up on the camera, okay? But from this position, I can see that the first buttonhole is 1/2 inch. Right here's the buttonhole, 1/2 inch from this top fold, okay? So I am just going to get my heat erasable pen, and again, if you're using one, make sure that it erases. And I'm going to draw a line at that position, okay? And it's going to get brighter as it gets drier. The next thing I'm going to measure is from this stitching line here, okay? Folding it at that stitching line, I can see that the buttonhole starts about 1/4 inch in. So that's going to be my starting position all the way down this front piece, okay? So I'm going to put that little line right there, which is 1/4 inch in. And that's going to be the mark for my first buttonhole. Now, hang on one second. I am going to grab this because it's going to make my life easier. It is a buttonhole expanding sewing gauge thing. Pull it all the way out and then push it in, okay? So I want to measure where all of these buttonholes are. Can you see them? Here, here, here. All right, now that I have this laying nice and flat, I'm going to push this together until they match. And ooh, at the widest position, that's kind of where it is. So while I was on the phone, I was actually thinking, I am going to go with this buttonhole placement, and it is probably about 1/16 inch narrower than this is, but not everyone will have one of those. So just to see, this is just over 2.5 inches. It is like 1/16 inch beyond 2.5 inches. This is 2.5 inches. I am putting my buttonholes 2.5 inches apart, okay? So if I lay this here and put my tip about 1/4 inch in, I'm just going to put a little dot where that is. And I need to make sure that this fold is where it should be, because it's going to want to pooch out and get unfolded, because when you put your buttonholes on, it has to stay folded exactly on that edge. So first let me come down, make sure my fold is good. I'm actually going to be putting a pin here just to make sure I'm keeping that fold together so it doesn't want to unfold on me, and marking where these buttonholes are all the way down just my front panel first. So since I have my little dots made where my positions are, then I'm going to come back with my ruler and make sure that this edge is nice and square here. I will use it up here. Draw a line straight out because I need a track to follow, and then put another little line 1/4 inch in, which is going to mark my starting point. So I end up with these little T's going down, and I'm going to mark that all the way down just my front panel first. Okay, so I'm about to go over and start putting all of these buttons in, and I just want to caution you, before you work on your actual fabric, do tests on a scrap of that fabric, because look, I had severe tension issues. This fabric kept wanting to get sucked into my feed dogs, you know, nastiness. So then I tried it out with tissue paper, and then I adjusted all my tensions. And finally I got where it needs to be, you know. Sometimes life is like that. But also this button is 3/4 inch, but I am finding that if I use a 5/8 inch buttonhole, it can get through just fine, and it's not going to be so loose that this is going to want to pop out. And again, this isn't my actual button. I have black ones coming. So that's what I'm going to be using, is the 5/8 inch buttonhole cog. So if you haven't seen it before, I'm going to give you a quick little demo over there doing just one of the buttonholes. And I'm actually going to start at the bottom and work my way up, because hopefully if there is any issue, I can get it worked up before up here where it's the most noticeable. And on this skirt, I am sewing it so that this is my right side, okay? And that the way that if I flip it back for pants, that is my wrong side. But I'm using black thread in both my needle and bobbin, so it shouldn't make a difference. Okay, so I'm trying a different angle here, and I'm not sure that it's going to be the best because I don't think you can see this side. All right, I'm going to need to switch it around. Okay, so starting down here at the bottom, first of all, lifting my presser foot up, I'm going to turn the crank on this until it's at its farthest back and centered position right there, okay? Then I'm going to get this pin out of the way. I'll put it way over here. That's what I'll do. Those pins are just holding it so the fold stays true, okay? I'm going to position it so if I turn my needle down, it's going straight into that cross point on those T's. And then up here at the front of the buttonhole is a mark, and I'm lining that up with where that track line should line up with, okay? And then we should be able to just get started. And it went around once, and for this I think that's good because down here it's not going to be under a lot of pressure. So for some reason this fabric is giving me issues here. I'm going to go ahead and clip it off. Now this does not have interfacing in it, so it's a little bit loopy. If you can see, I've got an oval shaped buttonhole. You can probably see that side better. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, and then I'll just keep moving up and doing one after another until I get up to the top. Okay, so now that all my buttonholes are in, I'm going to come back and iron it to get rid of all of those marks, and then I need to cut my buttonholes open. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to use my buttonhole scissors here. And what you do is you just place this little cut. Yeah, I need to clean that. That's just a little bit of stain. But you put the point in here where the buttonhole starts. So you have a little bit of an opening, and then I can carefully clip to where I want it to end. Once I have it opened, I'm going to come in here with my fingers and pull out any loose threads that might want to cause some issues later. And get some sharp little scissors in here to trim those off. And find my button. Here it is. Try my button through the hole, make sure it's going to fit. And it does, you know. So that is good, and then go on to the next one. So let me go ahead and do that to all these 9 buttonholes. So I have all of these buttonholes in this side of this flap in and cut open. Now I'm going to take this flap, and being aware that when I have it over here, the very top folded edge of this flap is at the bottom of this waistband seam, okay? I'm going to not get my skirt in disarray, okay? Move it over to this side, and I'm going to make sure that this top fold again is up next to this waistband. And I'm just going to pin it in place up here so it's not going to want to move down, and then line up the folded edge with the seam line here all the way down. Okay, make sure down here at the bottom that these edges match, okay, so that the little flap down here will lay on top of the bottom and everything's going to line up. So with this secure and this secure, I'm just going to flap it out, fluff it up so that it's going to lay nicely, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and put a pin just below this bottom buttonhole to hold that in place. Okay, so now I'm going to need to put buttonholes over here. So I am just going to reach through these buttonholes. I'll start here in the middle because why not? And draw a little horizontal line. I'm not worrying about, you know, placement this way exactly right now. I just want to get the height position of this. Okay, so fold it back. Can I see my little marks? Yes, I can. So that's good. Now I can go ahead and pull this off. Now, this has a little opening here. Below the opening, these buttonholes are just for looks. These will not be cut open. The only ones that are going to be cut open are these three that are where this flap opening are, okay? So, actually, let me grab a pattern piece real quick. Okay, I wanted to grab this front leg piece to show you that if I fold it at that seam line, the distance from the seam line to the beginning of the buttonhole is still about 1/4 inch. So we want to make sure that that is carried over here. So getting my ruler for each one of these little lines, I'm going to place my ruler, I can see through it kind of here, so that I have 1/4 inch from that seam line to where I'm going to start my mark, okay? And just to make it so that this mark is long enough while I am at my sewing machine, I'm just going to extend it out a little bit further like that. So I'm going to have a longer line here and a little cross point at 1/4 inch in from either the fold line or that seam line. And I'm going to do that for all of these buttons, okay? Once I get them all marked, then I'm going to go back to my buttonhole machine on my sewing machine and go ahead and put them in. When you're up here at the top, of course you're only putting buttonholes through this front part because your buttons are actually going to be sewn over here. Okay, so up here the top three, the buttonholes go through all of this. The bottom ones, you're going to have to open it up. And the buttonholes are only going through one layer of fabric. If that's going to be a problem, put a piece of tissue paper or interfacing or something behind it, just to give it a little more stability. I might actually put a little bit of black interfacing behind it just to give it a little oomph, because this fabric is very, very drapey, which is, you know, not good. So I'll show you that when I get to it. First, let me get this all marked and get them put in. Okay, so I got the top three done, and I tried to do one buttonhole and it just got a little bit wonky. This is the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little strip of fusible interfacing, and I am just going to fuse it over this seam allowance and everything. I'm going to take more pieces, obviously, and come all the way down here to the point where the bottom buttonhole is. Just fuse it on to give it more stability when I'm going to make that buttonhole. Yes, it'll probably erase my marks on the front, but I can put those back in pretty easily. Okay, so that worked a lot better. So I just have buttonholes, you know, they're sewn over that interfacing, which is fine. What I can do is just trim it a little bit around the buttonhole while I'm cutting my threads off here. Like I said, these buttonholes, they're not going to be functional. They're just more decorative because the buttons are going to be sewn on top of it. So it's not that important that it's super, super strong and durable. So let me go ahead and get these threads all clipped off, get it ironed so that all my marks get erased, and trim off my excess interfacing here in the back, and I'll be back. Okay, so this is what it looks like now. I'm going to go ahead and cut open and clean out these top three buttonholes that are actually going to be functional. Okay, so the bottom one, you know, just leaving as it is. And this one that I have issues on, I'm actually not going to be picking out these mistake threads because there's going to be a button sewn on top of that, which is going to hide it. And this fabric is so drapey, it would be really, really easy to cut some of the threads on this fabric, and then you have a hole and everything. So I think just leaving it as it is and covering it with the button is going to be the best option for me. So let me get these cut open and cleaned out, and then we'll move on to the next set of buttonholes. Okay, so now that that is done, we're going to have to do the same thing over on this side, but I'm going to be a little smarter this time, and before I put all my marks on, I'm going to go ahead and fuse a strip of that black interfacing to the back here. And just so I know exactly where I'm going to be putting it, I'm going to go ahead and stick a pin on the side that needs the interfacing here. Okay, so the interfacing probably about an inch or so wide all the way up, and then I'm going to come back and transfer my marks over. Okay, I want to show you this time I use actually a different interfacing. I have a whole roll of this stuff, which is a woven fusible interfacing, again, 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐞.com, and I just cut a strip of that and fused it on actually over both seam allowances and then an inch out. And it's light enough that I can just leave this in, so I just tucked it in where the hem is going to be. So now I think that that's going to be good for strength, as far as at least it's going to keep the fabric threads stable while I'm making my buttonholes. So just like before, I'm just putting my little flap over the front, matching up the bottom down here, matching up this position at the top, fluffing it out so it's nice and even, lining up the folded edge with my seam line, and then I'm just going to mark through these buttonholes that position where the buttonholes underneath need to be. Okay, and again, these bottom buttonholes, well, these down here are decorative because the buttons are going to be sewn on top of it. Okay, let me get these drawn up here. The top three are going to be functional. Okay, so now I have these little dots, and just like before, I'll go back, mark out my lines perpendicular to this seam line, a starting point about 1/4 inch in, you know, and then I'm going to use my buttonholer and sew them all on. Okay, I got all these sewn on, and look, I caught fabric in my buttonhole. So I'm going to have to very carefully cut these threads of this buttonhole out and move it over, but use that as a warning. Make sure you're only going over the layer you're supposed to. It's kind of tricky because like when you're doing these legs, you got everything shoved up under there, but yeah, be careful because I don't like cutting this kind of stuff out. Okay, so I got that fixed. In times like those, razor blade is my best friend, just saying. So these three up here in the flap area, I'm going to go ahead and cut those open. All of these below, again, are decorative. So I'm just leaving it as it is. And I'm thinking, even if you don't have trouble with your buttonholer and everything, I still kind of would recommend that you put some type of interfacing or backing or something back here. Because when you sew these buttons on, you know, it's not going to be a huge pull on them, but there will be some. And having more than just one layer of fabric there is, I think, going to be helpful. So let me get these cleaned out. After that, because my buttons, you know, hopefully will arrive in the next few days, I am going to take this downstairs where I can just, you know, needle and thread, hem this up by hand, hopefully somewhat invisibly. And I will be back with you when I get my buttons in the mail. Well, hello again. It's me, still here. I know this is a very long video, but let me tell you what I have going on. It is right now 6 o'clock. Well, that's my timer. 6 o'clock-ish on Wednesday night. I have a full day tomorrow already of places I have to be. And this video is supposed to go out early Friday morning. So my buttons have not arrived yet. I just checked their tracking, and for some reason these buttons are running late and they're not going to get here until Monday. So what I'm going to do is kind of improvise with what I have, which is this collection of buttons. And because I have to kind of improvise, this is a 1-inch button. This is a 7/8 button. These are the ones that are actually the size that I have ordered, okay? These fit in the buttonholes well. These, if I really, really squeeze them, they can. There is not a chance in the world that those are going to fit through my buttonholes. So because I'm just going to, in the make it work so that I can get the video finished mode, unfortunately, I am not going to be able to show you me unbuttoning on one side, flipping it over, and buttoning on the other side. It's because these bottom ones, I am just going to have to sew them over these buttonholes, and it's just going to have to look that way, and I've already done this side, okay? You get the idea. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? So I'm going to go ahead and sew my largest ones on the bottom, and then I've got a couple of these little black guys that are going to go just above it. Doesn't match, I know, trust me, I know. And then the top 4 are going to be these guys. So up to this point, they're pretty much decorative, okay? They're just being sewn on, and then later, when I get my other buttons, finally, then I'll be able to do the thing where I unbutton this side and flap it over onto this side. I'm really sorry I'm not going to be able to show that to you, but trust me, it will work. So let me get these sewn on, and when I'm sewing them over the buttonholes, I am stitching them over like this part, over closer to where this seam is, kind of like that 1/4 inch. So if this is the edge of my buttonhole, I'm just barely going in like 1/8 of an inch from that edge. Okay, if you can see, and I'm sewing my button on right here. All right, I don't want it in the middle. I definitely don't want it over here. I want it closer to this side of my buttonhole. So that's where I'm going to go ahead and sew these on down here. Once I get those done, I'll show you how I figure out where to place these upper 3 that are actually functioning for what we have going on. Okay, so right now I do have most of my buttons on in their higgledy-piggledy fashion. What I still need to put on are these 3 up here, and the way I do this is the same way I did it over here, basically. So I've got them sewn up to this one, which is just below this opening, and I'm going to go ahead and hook it together up here at the top. Make sure this is laying nice and smooth and placed this way where I want it to be. And I'm just going to come back once more with my heat erasable pen and just draw a little circle dot thing through there. So if I move this, for some reason, I wonder if my pen is running out. Hopefully not. Let's try it again. I did cut them. Oh, my pen might be drying up. That does happen. Well, I think I can see where it is. Here's a dot, here's a dot. And here's one. Oh my goodness. Well, this is the last thing I need to mark, so I'm just going to stick a pen through there. You know, it's close enough. The main thing is I want to mark where these buttonholes are based on the position of this overlapping piece. Not where they are on a piece of tissue paper, but by where they are on this actual piece, okay? So now that those are marked, now I can come back and sew my buttons on. And just like I was indicating down here where to sew them on, again up here, here's the edge of this band, and where my mark is, I'm coming in maybe a 1/4 inch, and that's where I'm going to be sewing my button over here, okay? So let me do that to these 3 places here, and then it's going to be finished. Well, finished enough for this video. Next week, off camera, I'll pull off all these buttons and put the real ones on. But for now, for us, then it'll be finished. So here it is. You know, you'll have to just forgive the mismatched buttons. It is what it is, but I think that you can get an idea. It's actually a really comfortable skirt. This back pleat here, it comes down pretty low. It's like way down here, and I think that's flattering, you know? I can tell you, if you make this and you finally go to put it on and it's like way too tight down here, just open up that dart a little bit. I've had to do that on something else before, and it's just fine. You know, raising that dart, opening up an inch or so. Once I have my correct buttons and I'm free to unbutton and move that flap back, you know, back and forth, you'll be able to see the pants better. But I think that hopefully you could have seen while I was making it that, you know, it is a very wide pant. But when it's buttoned down, it's actually quite, it's not like a super full skirt. It's actually quite formed, but there's a lot of width. It's just the tricky way that all of the pleats and everything go, and I think it's stuck in my boot there. So anyhow, it's quite the outfit. This is my dark academia outfit. I do have a jacket I was going to put on with it that I made last year, but I forgot it in the house. And I've already had to go back in the house twice for this video, so you know, it is what it is at this point. But I hope you like it. We're going to get started with our next challenge soon. But this is the Folkwear Big Sky riding skirt, highly recommended. Just take your time with all those buttonholes. There's a lot of them. Take care. Bye-bye.
Living my bucolic life, 𝐥𝐢𝐤𝐞 city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sew and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.